There are moments that define a man. Moments where everything you believe, everything you've built, everything you are, comes down to one decision. For Bumpy Johnson, that moment came at 3:30 in the morning on a hot July night. He just left Small's Paradise after settling a dispute between two numbers runners. The streets were empty, except for a few working girls and a drunk sleeping it off in a doorway. That's when Bumpy heard it, a sound he knew too well, the wet choking gasp of someone dying from an overdose. Most men would have kept walking, but Bumpy wasn't most men. He turned into the alley and saw the kid face down, convulsing, foam coming out of his mouth, dead in 5 minutes if nobody helped. Then Bumpy saw the ring on the kid's finger, gold Italian, with initials DM, David Mitchell, Sonny Mitchell's only son. Sonny Mitchell, the man who'd been trying to kill Bumpy for 2 years, the man who'd ambushed Bumpy's crew, the man who'd called Bumpy a dead man walking. Bumpy could walk away, let the kid die, call it karma, call it justice. Sonny would be destroyed by grief, weakened, vulnerable, or what Bumpy did in the next 60 seconds would become the most talked about story in Harlem history. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand Harlem in 1948. World War II was over. The soldiers had come home, but the war on the streets of Harlem was just beginning. Heroin was flooding into the neighborhood, pure stuff coming from Turkey, through Italian mob connections. It was killing people, young people, kids who thought they were invincible until their hearts stopped beating. Bumpy Johnson was 41 years old in 1948. He'd been running Harlem since before most of these young hustlers were born. The numbers racket, the policy games, the protection, it all flowed through Bumpy. He wasn't the loudest man in the room. He wasn't the flashiest. But when Bumpy Johnson walked into Small's Paradise or the Cotton Club, everyone noticed. The music didn't stop, but the conversation did, just for a second, just long enough to show respect. Bumpy had rules. He didn't sell heroin to kids. He didn't allow violence against women. And he protected the neighborhood. If you were from Harlem, Bumpy made sure the Italian mob didn't push you around. That was the deal. That was the code. But there was one man in Harlem who didn't respect Bumpy's code. One man who thought the old guard was finished, that it was time for new blood, new money, new rules. His name was Sonny Mitchell. Sonny was 35, ambitious, and connected to a mid-level crew out of the Bronx. He'd started moving heroin into East Harlem 2 years earlier, setting up shop on 1116th Street, right on the edge of Bumpy's territory. At first, Bumpy let it slide. The city was big enough for everyone, but Sonny got greedy, started pushing into 125th Street, started telling people Bumpy was old, finished, that his time was over. Then Sonny made a mistake. He shot up one of Bumpy's number spots, put 3 men in the hospital. One of them was Bumpy's nephew. That's when the war started. Bumpy burned down Sonny's warehouse. Sonny tried to ambush Bumpy outside Small's Paradise. Bumpy's crew kidnapped one of Sonny's lieutenants, sent him back with a message: stay out of Harlem. It was ugly, personal, and everyone in Harlem knew it would end with one of them dead. Sonny Mitchell hated Bumpy Johnson more than any man alive. And Bumpy, he'd made peace with the fact that Sonny would have to be dealt with permanently. That was the world Bumpy was living in on July 15th. A world where enemies didn't get mercy, where weakness got you killed, where the only thing that mattered was power. But that night, walking back to his car at 3:30 in the morning, Bumpy was about to make a decision that would defy every rule of that world. The alley off Lenox Avenue was dark, smelled like garbage and piss. Bumpy almost walked past it, but he heard the sound, that choking, gasping sound. He'd heard it before, too many times. Kids overdosing on heroin so pure their bodies couldn't handle it. Bumpy turned into the alley. The kid was maybe 19 years old, wearing expensive clothes, Italian shoes, face down in a puddle of his own vomit. His body was convulsing, jerking like a puppet with cut strings. Bumpy knelt down, checked for a pulse. It was there, but faint, irregular. The kid was minutes away from dying. That's when Bumpy saw the ring, gold custom-made with the initials DM engraved on the side. David Mitchell. Bumpy had seen that ring before, seen it on Sonny Mitchell's son, when the kid was running around Harlem, pretending to be a gangster trying to prove himself to his father. Bumpy stood up, looked down at the dying kid. Sonny Mitchell's only son, the son of the man who tried to kill Bumpy 6 times in 2 years. For 10 seconds, Bumpy Johnson stood in that alley and didn't move. 10 seconds, where he calculated the angles. David Mitchell dies. Sonny Mitchell is destroyed. A man who loses his child doesn't think straight, doesn't plan, doesn't fight. He mourns, and a mourning man is vulnerable. This was an opportunity, a gift from the streets. Bumpy didn't even have to do anything, just walk away. Let nature take its course. Let the heroin that Sonny Mitchell was pushing into Harlem kill Sonny Mitchell's own son. The irony was almost poetic. Bumpy turned to leave. Then he stopped. He thought about the code. The code he'd lived by his entire life. Women and children. You don't touch them ever, even if they're your enemies. But David Mitchell wasn't a child. He was 19, old enough to make his own choices, old enough to know what heroin could do. Bumpy took another step toward the street, and then he heard it. A small sound, almost like a whimper. The kid was crying, not from pain, from fear. The kind of fear that comes when you realize you're about to die, and there's nothing you can do about it. Bumpy closed his eyes. When he opened them, he'd made his decision. Bumpy Johnson picked up David Mitchell with both arms. The kid was dead weight, limp, still convulsing, foam and vomit on his face. Bumpy carried him out of the alley across Lenox Avenue toward his car. People saw a few late-night stragglers, a couple of working girls on the corner. They stared. Bumpy Johnson carrying a dying white kid in his arms. In 1948 Harlem, that image didn't make sense. Bumpy didn't care. He put David in the back seat of his Cadillac and drove. Harlem Hospital was 6 blocks away. He made it in 4 minutes. The emergency entrance was around back. Bumpy pulled up, carried David inside. The nurse at the desk looked up, saw a black man in an expensive suit carrying an unconscious white kid, and her eyes went wide. Overdose, Bumpy said. Heroin, you need to save him now. The nurse hesitated just for a second. In 1948, hospitals in Harlem served black patients, but they weren't always fast about it, especially not at 3:45 in the morning. Bumpy leaned forward. His voice was quiet, calm, but it carried weight. You're going to save this boy's life. You're going to call the best doctor you have. You're going to do it right now, and I'm going to sit in that waiting room until you do. The nurse grabbed a gurney. 2 Wortleys came running. They took David Mitchell from Bumpy's arms and rushed him into the emergency room. Bumpy sat down in the waiting room. It was empty, except for an old woman with a bandaged hand and a man sleeping in the corner. Bumpy sat there alone, silent, waiting. His shirt was covered in vomit. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from adrenaline, from the weight of what he'd just done. He'd saved his enemy's son, the son of a man who wanted him dead, the son of a man who tried to destroy everything Bumpy had built, and now Bumpy had to wait and see if the kid survived. And if he did, Bumpy had to figure out what came next. At 6:15 a.m., the sun was starting to rise over Harlem. Bumpy had been sitting in that waiting room for 2 hours. That's when the doors burst open. Sonny Mitchell walked in with 5 armed men. Sonny Mitchell looked like he hadn't slept. His eyes were red. His suit was wrinkled. His hand was on the gun tucked into his waistband. He saw Bumpy sitting in the waiting room and stopped. For 5 seconds, the 2 men just stared at each other. Bumpy didn't stand up, didn't reach for his gun. Just sat there calm, waiting. Sonny's crew fanned out, hands on their weapons, ready. Where is he? Sonny's voice was raw, broken. Operating room, Bumpy said. They're trying to save him. Sonny's jaw tightened. What did you do to him? Bumpy didn't flinch. I didn't do anything to him. I found him dying in an alley. Overdose. I brought him here. Sonny laughed. It was a bitter, ugly sound. You expect me to believe that? You found my son and instead of letting him die, you saved him. Why? So you can use him against me. Bumpy shook his head. I saved him because he's a kid, and kids shouldn't die in alleys because their fathers are too busy fighting wars to notice they're falling apart. The words hit Sonny like a punch. His face went pale. You don't know anything about my son? I know he was using the heroin you're pushing into Harlem, Bumpy said quietly. I know he overdosed on products so pure it stopped his heart. And I know if I hadn't found him, you'd be planning his funeral right now instead of standing here pointing guns at me. Sonny's hand tightened on his weapon. Maybe I should shoot you anyway. You could, Bumpy said, but your son is in that operating room fighting for his life, and when he wakes up, if he wakes up, the first thing he's gonna ask is who saved him. You want to tell him it was the man you killed, the man you taught him to hate? Sonny's hand dropped from his gun. A doctor came through the double doors. He looked exhausted. His scrubs were stained with blood. Are you David Mitchell's family? The doctor asked. Sonny stepped forward. I'm his father. The doctor nodded. He's alive barely. We had to restart his heart twice. He's in critical condition, but he's stable. If you'd brought him in 5 minutes later, there would have been nothing we could do. Sonny looked at the doctor, then at Bumpy. Who brought him in? The doctor pointed at Bumpy. That man carried him through the doors himself. Wouldn't leave until we started working on him. Sonny stood there silent. His crew looked at him, waiting for orders, waiting to see what happened next. Bumpy stood up slowly. Your son is alive, Sonny. That's all that matters. What happens between us? That's for another day. He started walking toward the exit. Wait. Bumpy stopped, turned around. Sonny Mitchell looked broken, not physically, emotionally, like a man who just realized how close he'd come to losing everything. Why? Sonny asked. His voice was barely a whisper. Why would you save him after everything I've done to you? Bumpy was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that nobody in that room expected. Because I've lost people too, and if I can stop another father from feeling that pain, even if that father is my enemy, I will every time. 3 weeks later, Bumpy Johnson walked into Small's Paradise like he did every Tuesday night, sat in his usual booth, ordered his usual drink. The door opened. Sonny Mitchell walked in alone. The entire restaurant went silent. Everyone knew about the war between Bumpy and Sonny. Everyone was waiting for the explosion. Sonny walked over to Bumpy's booth, stood there for a moment, then he sat down. My son is alive, Sonny said. Doctors say he'll make a full recovery. He's in rehab now, getting clean. Bumpy nodded. That's good. He told me what happened that night. Told me he'd copped some bad heroin. Told me he was dying, and he told me you carried him to the hospital in your own arms. Bumpy didn't respond. Sonny reached into his jacket. Bumpy's hand moved toward his gun, but Sonny pulled out an envelope, slid it across the table. That's $10,000 for the hospital bills, for everything. Bumpy pushed the envelope back. I didn't do it for money. Sonny looked at him, really looked at him. Then why? Because your son isn't our war, Bumpy said. He's a kid who made a mistake. He deserved a second chance. Sonny was quiet for a long time. Then he said, the war is over. I'm pulling my crew out of Harlem. You won. Bumpy shook his head. I didn't win. Your son survived. That's the only thing that matters. Sonny stood up, extended his hand. I owe you my son's life. That's a debt I can never repay, but I'm going to try. Bumpy stood up, looked at Sonny's hand. Then he shook it. The entire restaurant watched as two enemies became something else. Not friends, not allies, but men who understood that some things, like a father's love for his son, were bigger than any war. From that day forward, Sonny Mitchell never moved against Bumpy Johnson again. And Bumpy, he never spoke about what happened that night, didn't use it for leverage, didn't brag, just went back to his life, running Harlem the way he always had, with principle. The story of Bumpy Johnson and Sonny Mitchell spread through Harlem like wildfire. Not in the newspapers, not on the radio, but in the barbershops, the pool halls, the street corners, where real people talked about real things. People talked about how Bumpy Johnson had saved his worst enemy's son, how he'd carried a dying kid to the hospital when he could have walked away, how he'd chosen mercy over revenge. And the story changed things. It reminded people that even in a world of violence and betrayal, there were still lines you didn't cross. There were still codes you lived by. There were still moments where being human mattered more than being powerful. David Mitchell got clean, stayed clean. Years later, he left New York and became a teacher in Philadelphia. He never forgot the night Bumpy Johnson saved his life. Every year on July 15th, he'd send a card to Small's Paradise. Just 2 words. Thank you. Sonny Mitchell kept his word. He pulled out of Harlem, focused on legitimate businesses, and whenever someone asked him about Bumpy Johnson, he'd say the same thing. That man taught me what it means to have honor. Bumpy Johnson never spoke about it publicly, but people close to him said it was one of the moments he was most proud of. Not because it ended a war, not because it gave him power, but because it proved that even in the darkest streets, compassion still mattered. When Bumpy died in 1968, Sonny Mitchell was at the funeral, standing in the back, quiet, paying his respects to the man who'd shown him that enemies could become something more. The lesson of that July night in 1948 is simple, but profound. Power isn't just about who you can hurt, it's about who you choose to save. Bumpy Johnson had the power to let David Mitchell die. He had every reason to, every excuse, every justification, but he chose differently. He chose to pick up his enemy's son and save his life. And in doing so, he proved that real strength isn't found in violence. It's found in mercy. If this story about compassion in the darkest places moved you, hit that subscribe button and smash the like. Share this with someone who needs to hear that doing the right thing matters even when nobody's watching. Drop a comment about a time someone showed you unexpected mercy. And don't forget that notification bell for more untold stories about the real Bumpy Johnson, the man behind the legend.